everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Is It Just Me podcast with Jess and Luke, the show dedicated to your unpopular F1 opinions. Now, we are talking to you after what was probably one of the best F1 season openers I've ever seen. Definitely since I've been watching Formula One, one of the best season openers I've ever seen. Would you agree with me, Luke? That was pretty special, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It was it had everything. It had everything that we want in an F1 race. I mean, we saw lots of great overtakes, some really great fights through the field, drama for Ferrari, Mercedes, they had their issues as well. Lando Norris getting on the podium. I think Charles Leclerc getting on the podium, that was a surprise given how bad Ferrari were. And it was just a race that really bundled, I think, everything we love about F1 into a 90-minute segment. And I think after such a long layoff and everyone was so desperate to get F1 back, and I had such excitement sort of bubbling up just before the lights out, that it really was great that after all of that, the race then delivered such a brilliant event for everyone to really get stuck into and enjoy.
You're right as well, because the worst thing would be to have that much level of anticipation, and then for it to just be well, that's great. Mercedes have run away with it, which is what it was looking like in practice and quali, right? Their pace was just untouchable, and it would look like it was just going to be a Mercedes show. But thanks to something we're going to be talking about in this podcast, that's not entirely what happened. So today's opinion is Formula One is better when there's less reliability. So obviously, I think one of the things that came to mind when we were thinking about the topic of this podcast and when we saw this as an opinion was that, you know how everybody always talks about, F1 was always better in the good old days. And a lot of it, especially when we looked at some of the F1 rewinds, like the 96 Monaco Grand Prix came to mind. And we all know what my opinion on Monaco is. But one of the reasons why that race was so iconic and so kind of heart in mouth the entire way was that you didn't really know. Obviously the weather played a part, but you didn't really know how many cars were going to make it to the end of the race, and a big point of that was the reliability. So I think for the first time I've kind of gone, oh god, maybe they were right, maybe F1 really was better back in the good old days. What do you think?
Yeah, it had a big 90s energy is the way you can really describe that the race in Austria.
It was brilliant.
It just was a really dramatic race in terms of people dropping out, and there were so many incidents like early on as well. And already you're kind of thinking, you're looking at even the Williams drivers and thinking, they might be able to sneak up into the points here. And we don't get that in F1 nowadays. Like we have the odd season opener where there's a few issues or incidents, and I think so. This was the lowest number of finishes in a race since the 2015 season open in Australia. But I believe only 15 drivers started that race because of various issues on the grid, and Bottas was ruled out through injury, for example, and there were sort of fewer finishes, fewer starters even to begin with. Whereas in this case, like we had a healthy field of 20 cars take the start, and they just started dropping out like flies. And you do sort of think back to the days of the 90s where you had cars, okay, they were winning races by like 3 laps or whatever, but it would be like there were 5 finishes, and that would be like a totally normal race, and everyone would just let that slide. Whereas nowadays, like if you had a race like that, as we're now talking about after this race, we're kind of like, well, what the hell happened? Like, how did it happen that there were only 11 cars that actually made it home? But that is an array of factors. It's down to weaknesses in the cars. Obviously, the first time they've run them in anger this year, they've had such a long layoff. The challenges of the Austria circuit as well, that Mercedes in particular in recent years have really, really struggled with. And thankfully, some good sort of feisty wheel-to-wheel racing that led to a couple of incidents as well.
So why don't we kick off? Because obviously this isn't just about what Luke and I think. This is about what you guys at home think. And there was a load of mixed opinions to this topic, which was really cool to see, because it is something where we're like, okay, reliability is great, but actually does it take away from racing? So we're going to go through all those points as we always do. Let's kick off with Sam, who is going to take us through why reliability is a good thing.
Poor reliability certainly improves Formula One because the race becomes wide open and really unpredictable. It gives more teams an opportunity to finish above expectations, like in Lando's case on Sunday. And although he did a great job, Lando would not have finished on the podium based on outright pace alone. This is why, in my opinion, racing was far more exciting 20 or 30 years ago. There were a lot more factors that were out of a driver's control, and reliability was certainly one of them. If you look back at the greatest races of all time, the majority of them are down to mixed weather conditions and reliability issues, like Monaco 96 when Olivier Panis won for Ligier, or when Johnny Herbert won for Stewart at the Nürburgring in 1999. Also, how many times did we used to see a driver dominating a race weekend and lead up until the last few laps and then suffer a failure? That sort of thing doesn't happen as much anymore because of the advancement of technology, both on and off the track, with all the data and telemetry that the teams and drivers have access to. That is why I feel that although Sunday's race was one of the best races I've witnessed in a long time, this was a bit of a one-off because of the delayed start to the season. And even for round 2 in Austria this weekend, I think we will see a lot less mechanical problems. It would be great if this thing continued for the rest of the season, but personally I cannot see it happening.
So pretty much a lot of the things that you covered off just at the top of the show, but let's go into them in a little bit more detail. So I guess first off, what we want as F1 fans is we don't want to turn up on a Sunday and to know exactly how a race is going to pan out, which, again, not to keep bringing it up, but one of the reasons why I'm not a massive fan of Monaco, because I just feel like I know what's going to happen on a Sunday unless something crazy happens. So with that unpredictability level, I guess that is reliability is something we can't predict really. That brings a different element to racing, right?
Yeah, definitely. And it is that kind of that drama of, as Sam says, sort of not knowing, like, even if a driver does a perfect race, and even if the pecking order is perhaps very well set within the teams 2 by 2, that still may not be enough to get them home, and there may sort of still be something that comes in and really shakes things up. It's similar with the weather. Like, ultimately, that's something you really cannot control. For the reliability of their cars, they're going to do everything they can to build, obviously, an absolutely 100% reliable car that they know will get to the finish. But there's things that you just ultimately can't prepare for, and Austria in particular is such a trying track. It's 800 meters above sea level, so that puts a lot of extra strain on the engines. That's something that's been Mercedes' big Achilles heel in recent years, and the cooling of the car, but also the curbs that we heard. James Vowles with a Valtteri, it's James, followed by a Lewis, it's James as well, coming over the radio and saying, guys, stay off the curbs, because like you are damaging the cars just because of the vibrations it puts through that could cause parts to fail. And if the sensor went, the gearbox would go, and that would be it, game over. And Mercedes were really fearful that was going to ruin their race. Toto Wolff said after the race he feared an instant kill on both cars because of the issues. So it's that kind of jeopardy. I think that's what we like in Formula One. We kind of like the idea that the teams, that they can build a quick race car, they can absolutely like smash a race weekend, but the reliability could still throw a spanner in the works and really shake things up. And so I definitely see where Sam's coming from, because you look back sort of to the 90s. He mentioned the race at the Nürburgring in 1999. I mean, that was an absolutely stellar Grand Prix, and you had all of the leaders like dropping out because of a mix of reliability issues. The weather was a problem as well, and it was so dramatic. And that's the kind of drama that I think we really, really want to see in F1.
Yeah, totally. It's completely and utterly the fact that you can be sat there. And I don't think there was a moment during that Austrian Grand Prix where I felt like I could relax, just because of how many people were dropping out. You just didn't know who was going to be next. It was like, and nobody was safe either. That was the interesting thing about this Grand Prix. And kind of, again, what Sam's touching on is like, maybe this is going to be a one-off, but it did just seem like there wasn't one engine supplier or like one team that had problems. It was across the field, which again, like, it added to a bit more. One of the reasons we've got down here is that we would get more shock results and more opportunities for the midfield to take. That means that the championship will be mixed up more, and you would see like having a McLaren and a very poorly looking Ferrari actually on the podium would start to become more of a norm. But let's have a quick listen to Andrew and what his take was on the reliability issue.
The unreliability of various different teams in Austria certainly made the race very interesting. I think that unreliability in Formula One does tend to mix things up a little bit. You don't really know what to expect as the race goes on. I mean, obviously, you'd want to see as many drivers finishing a race as possible, because the more drivers you have in that race, the more battles you potentially have. But I think what we saw yesterday was that even with ending up with 11 cars at the end of the race in between the cars that remained was pretty close. As a neutral fan, it's nice to see when Mercedes are struggling a little bit with reliability, and also the Mercedes teams, because that engine has been fairly bulletproof for a number of years, and it's better to see them slightly on the back foot. But what I would say is that I don't think many people are saying this, but the radio messages between Mercedes and Hamilton and Bottas were not really actually technical problems. They were just trying to implement team orders and disguising them badly, similar to the Multi-21 between Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber.
That's a bit controversial at the end there. Now, this was actually something, I mean, this hasn't got so much to do with reliability, but I guess maybe it was what Andrew's insinuating is that it was just, they were using reliability issues to disguise their team order messaging. But was it you that asked Toto Wolff about that afterwards, or somebody asked him in the press conference, and he said, absolutely no way, that's not what we were doing? What do you think about that?
That's correct. So John Noble, colleague, and myself, we spoke to Toto after the race. Toto, to quote him, he said, "Don't get paranoid. This has nothing to do with Multi-21. There were no team orders, no hidden, no subtle, and no direct." And I think when we all heard it, and because of the wording as well, a little bit like, I'm not so sure. And I think Multi-7744 will be a lot harder to try and get out as well. But it was, I can understand it. I can understand where it's coming from. But Mercedes, they've never been a team to try and hide team orders. Like, they've been pretty direct when it's been a Valtteri, it's James, move over kind of situation. But they really, I think they really were in a lot of trouble, and they were really fearful. And we saw the other Mercedes power teams having issues. George Russell, his Williams failure, I've been told that apparently it's like it was catastrophic, I believe was the word that my source used, and that's like pretty bad. And then obviously Lance Stroll had an issue on his car as well. So it wasn't just the Mercs themselves, like all the Mercedes power cars had issues. So that again kind of points to it being a wider problem. But I think coming back to the idea of reliability, and that I think particularly when one team is so dominant, yes, it is definitely really, really cool when you see them having some issues and to maybe sort of bunch the pack a little bit. And I think that before the final safety car, even with the issues and even telling the drivers to stay off the curbs, the Mercedes was still so quick that they'd have had a big advantage, that they'd have cruised home. Like, they'd have got home pretty easily. But then when the field bunched, and particularly when you had Alex Albon just stuck behind and ready to attack, and obviously went for the pass on Lewis that resulted in their contact, I think that was like Mercedes were in real trouble there, because they were like, okay, well, we can't just back off because we've got a Red Bull behind us on fresher tyres, quicker tyres. Like, we could be cooked. So it's that kind of, again, that jeopardy, and I think that's what we want to see. We want to see pressure be put on the big teams. We don't want to see them just run away with it. And even when they can easily put 15 seconds on the field, as Mercedes did, we like something that can maybe sort of pull them back in and maybe sort of make it a little bit more interesting.
So as was mentioned at the top of the show, this was quite a unique scenario, right? It was the first race back. The teams haven't been able to really do any proper testing of their cars since testing, and I think that was a case of everybody was talking about whether the drivers would be ready and be back on top form in time for the Grand Prix this season. But actually, it looked like we needed to be looking at the cars a little bit more, because the cars didn't seem very ready to be up and racing again, or driven in anger, as I think every single pundit on the Sky team said at some point over the weekend. But how would we go about that if we're going to say that right? Let's for argument's sake say reliability is one of the key ingredients that we need in Formula One to add to the unpredictability. How would we go about creating that, or ensuring that we get more of it in Formula One?
Well, I think ultimately very basically, the more the teams run the cars, the more they understand them, therefore the more reliable they are. So that is why the first race of every single season tends to be, I think, if you look at the averages, it will probably be the race with the most retirements through a year, purely because it's the first time these cars are run in anger and really sort of put through their paces and made to stretch their legs. Particularly this year, one element the teams had to deal with coming into the season was reduced testing time as well. So they used to have 8 days going into the through pre-season. That was cut to 6 days this year, and even then, I think I did a feature just after testing saying really it's too much, and like all of the teams were basically like we could probably cut back to 4 days quite easily because the regulations are now so mature. I mean, we're in year 8 of the power units, I believe, so they know the cars inside out basically. But then I think what we saw on Sunday was perhaps a counter to that okay, they know the cars very well, but even with 6 days of testing, that wasn't enough to prevent all of these issues occurring as they did. So I think that's definitely part of it. So if you were to cut back testing time even more, that would definitely sort of put a bit more pressure on the teams and say, look, you've really got to be confident that you've built these cars to be sturdy because we're only giving you, say, 4 days of running before you actually get out there. And I think further on from that as well, if you wanted to cut back on even more track time, you could say Friday practice. Like, we've got 3 hours worth of practice on a Friday. A lot of it is just long runs and it's not particularly exciting for the fans. Why not shape things up a little bit more? Why not say, particularly I guess this season when we've got back-to-back races at the same circuit, why not say on Friday you're getting one session and it is an hour, or you've only got FP3 on a Saturday, that's all you're getting before you go into qualifying in the race. Like, that could really, really spice things up.
I think I'm massively in favour of that. I mean, if we look at the races that we've had over the past few years, and where there's been either something's happened, either that it's been rained off or no one got a clean run. So obviously, like Austria last year was another interesting race because no one got a clean run because everyone kept breaking their cars on the stoppers out on, was it turn 9? Everybody was just kind of, nobody got a clean run. So they got data still, but nothing that would tell them, okay, here's what our long race pace is, here's what our short run pace is. It was just bitty, which then gave us like a really interesting lineup on the Saturday, and ended up with Verstappen pretty much running away with it at one point. So, and if we look back to COTA 2018. Friday practice completely rained off. We had a Kimi Räikkönen win. You know, it was just it seems like every time we get an interruption in Friday running, we get a more exciting quali and a more exciting race because all the teams are less prepared. And I think in this modern era of F1, everything seems to be based on data, which is unsurprising, right? That's kind of advancement across the entire world seems to be on how we manipulate data and how we're using data to improve efficiencies or whatever. But it does give that kind of like, I guess one of the really wonderful things that I think that a lot of us fell in love with Formula One for was that kind of raw nature of machine and driver, and that, you know, the machine was something there to be tamed almost, and that it could be unpredictable, and it's engineering at its absolute limit. So we should be seeing these cars break down more rather than it being like, well, you know, I mean, Christian Horner was talking on the Sky coverage about how they can overlap each driver's times now. So they can see, okay, Hamilton's going quicker in this corner than Verstappen. And so they use all that data to then improve their race, which is incredible. Like I'm always in awe about how much data that these teams are using and how it can really alter the effect of a race. But it also does take away from that kind of human element. And if it's just calculations, then of course we're going to get a methodical race that doesn't really lead to anything unless we get a crash or something like that. So is that over-reliance on data taking away from racing?
I think there's a definite argument for that, and I think that under the 2021 regulations, when they first in 2018 really sort of set out what their goals were for these rules, a big part was telemetry, and they said basically they wanted to really limit telemetry, get rid of these sort of big like action mission control sensors that all teams have got their factories and everything, and really try and cut it back. And I mean, I've been lucky enough to go to the Mercedes factory and like sit in that room and see what they've been doing, and it's just like, yeah, it just screens everywhere, and every decision decision that pit wall is taking, they will have all of the data and all the information like being filtered through back at home to make sure they can make the best decision. And okay, that's brilliant. Like, okay, you really, really can like make the absolute best informed decisions you can. But as you said, like the idea of sort of man and machine and that being it, like, does it take away from some of that? Like, wouldn't it have been better that if they had these gearbox issues, Mercedes on Sunday, that the drivers were left basically to work that out for themselves? Like, okay, well, like fourth gear's missing or something like that, and how do they actually manage that and deal with it? And would that be better? I don't know. Like, it's a difficult debate, because I think it would maybe lead to a lot more issues for drivers, and maybe they'll say like, well, they can't really understand what's going on with the car as much as they do now. But that reliance on data, it's something that I think F1 maybe has gone a little bit too far with, and it's got to find maybe a nicer middle ground to make it a bit more about the driver having an impact.
I think it also, that kind of approach to racing favours the teams with the highest budgets, right? Because they can have the HQs that look like bleeding NASA or something. Do you know what? Whereas the smaller teams don't have the same capabilities, and they're dealing with a similar output, but it's never going to be the same. But would taking, for instance, if we're going to say like maybe it'd be a good idea to take Friday testing away, does that then take away from the smaller outfits, because obviously they don't have the same facilities as the like of a Ferrari or a Mercedes? So for instance, like a Williams, would that hinder their progress through the year and actually just mean that the reliability would fall predominantly on their machinery rather than a Mercedes?
Yeah, that's definitely a fair argument. And I think that as we look towards sort of the budget cap era of F1, I think a lot of it is going to sort of come down to who has the best facilities already and like who's sort of best prepared, I think, for the upcoming reduction in spending. A cut in testing, it would probably impact the smaller teams more, because obviously the bigger teams, they've got the wind tunnels, they've got the simulators, they've got all of the data, they've got everything at their fingertips basically to try and sort of negate the impacts of that. But we are seeing, I think F1 is starting to look at more of a handicap system in terms of helping the smaller teams from 2021. So from next year there'll be the aerodynamic, or ATR it's called, aerodynamic testing restrictions. That's what it stands for. And that will basically give the champions the least amount of aero testing time, and Williams or whoever's finishes last will have the most. And then as of 2022, the gaps between them will grow even bigger. And that is kind of F1's way of trying to sort of close the field again. The budget cap again should sort of work with that and help with that. And it is like giving them more of a chance, which is good. So I think that's a sign that F1 isn't opposed to that kind of idea. I believe around 2005, F1, they allowed, I think, the bottom 5 in the Constructors' Championship to run a third car on Fridays. Might that be an option? Might that be a way to get more young drivers into the sport? Something we've discussed before. I don't know. It would be, I think it's definitely something F1 has to bear in mind. But I think that you're right in that the bigger teams ultimately, they've got the budget to kind of just take whatever's thrown at them and go, okay, we'll manage. And losing track time for them would be like, well, okay, we've got the simulators back at home. We can run X many sort of test days, sort of simulated and work it out.
I think so. We're kind of naturally progressing into the reasons why maybe having a reliance on reliability would actually hinder F1 rather than help it. But because we've also got the issue of if a part breaks, though, again, those smaller teams don't necessarily have the spares or the ability to fix it in quite the same way. So again, like if we've constantly got the smaller outfits breaking down, obviously we lost a Williams. They were one of the casualties. I mean, the spread was pretty even, unless you're Red Bull and you got a double DNF. Ouch. At your home Grand Prix. Double ouch. But like that I guess is one of the arguments that would be like, well, that's stupid, because if the smaller teams are already on the back foot in terms of overall car development, if you then throw in the whole thing that their car could blow up at any point because they haven't had testing time, then we're just going to have, again, like a similar event where it's just really not going to be fair, is it? And we've actually got a little bit of audio from Charlie, who I think is kind of aligned with that outlook.
I think there are two sides to it, because obviously there's a chance that it can ruin someone. Obviously it will ruin someone's race, and that can be really disappointing. And obviously it's not on the driver, and it will make the driver look worse in hindsight. But also, obviously, as we saw with yesterday's race, the amount of drama that it created, because there's safety cars and then there's loads of alternate strategies, because yesterday's race was going to be a one-stop, and then quite a few drivers stopped for a second time, and you had drivers on different strategies, and it just made it more exciting. And that's because of the safety cars, because of the unreliability. So I think there's definitely two ways to look at it.
Okay, so kind of agreeing with what we're saying in that it's potentially unfair for drivers. Obviously, drivers are there to win races, to do the best that they can do. If their machinery is constantly breaking down, they're going to start getting pissed off. And it's also, like, I guess, an unfair representation of their talents, and might hinder them. But I guess, like, if you look to a and this probably isn't the same argument. There's probably going to be a lot of people in the comments telling me that why am I making this comparison? But if you think back to like 2012, it was such a mixed up season. And I think that's what we're trying to essentially recreate by the fact that, yes, okay, you might have, like, for instance, in Austria, especially, I guess, in this isolated scenario, we've currently only got 8 races. We're hoping for more, but at this point in time, there are only 8 Grand Prix. And we're at a position where Valtteri Bottas has got a huge head start on Lewis Hamilton, which we didn't think, well, yeah, if you listen to our previous podcast.
Someone thought he would.
Was that me? I think it was me. Was it not me?
No.
Oh. Was it you?
I said Bottas would win a race, so I'm cashing that in.
You said he'd win a race, but I'm talking about the...
I said he'd win in Austria.
That's... Oh, God, did you?
Yeah,
you're gonna be a nightmare to live with this season, I can already tell.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, he... As we said in that podcast... Well, you said in that podcast. I'll try not to claim it. You know, he's now we're in a situation where it's not as clear-cut. We had a McLaren on the podium in Lando Norris. We almost had a Racing Point on the podium, which maybe we were expecting a little bit more than a McLaren. And we got the Ferrari on the podium.
Yeah,
so
another midfield car. Wow.
Oh, God. Oh, savagery. Jesus. But I guess, like, yeah, I mean, yeah.
It was the 5th fastest car in Austria. Like, sorry, guys, but...
Is Carlos Sainz checking his decision? Maybe we'll that on another podcast.
That's next week's issue.
But I mean, yeah, like it wouldn't necessarily be that the same cars would have the same reliability issues, or would that be the case? I guess, like, if you've got a part on the car that's not working, or the balance of your car isn't right, then you are gonna maybe see the same teams face the same problems.
Yeah, I mean, classic proof of that is Honda and McLaren in their sort of 3-year nightmare, basically. It was just that every single year, McLaren, well, 15 and 17 especially, McLaren would have these issues, and it was quite sad to watch, really. And then I think it was, pretty sure it was 17, where Fernando Alonso was saying, like, well, we've got the best chassis. It's just the engine that's letting it down. And then that quite quickly turned out not to be the case the following year. But it is things like that where you say, okay, is the reliability of the car, particularly on a power unit side, like how much does that actually hinder seeing great drivers such as Fernando Alonso, great teams such as McLaren, and really deny them the opportunity to actually prove what they can do and properly fight? So there is that case, definitely. And I think that we want every driver to have a fair opportunity, and that's what F1 is now trying to do by having a budget cap and really try and make it more sustainable, to also bring the grid together and make it basically a more even fight. And ideally, in an ideal world, we would have 20 cars, all fairly similar in terms of pace, able to fight it out, fine margins, and it would come down to the operational strength of the teams and the quality of the drivers to really stand out and be as good as possible. And it is, you can maybe argue that on Sunday, for example, Verstappen, he was running second, he was on the alternate strategy, starting on the mediums. Could he have taken the fight to Bottas? Could he have maybe mixed up with Lewis? Could he have really taken the fight to them? We don't know, because he had the issue on his car, an electrical fault, I believe Red Bull put it down to. And that denied us that chance to see that. And ultimately, yes, we saw issues for other drivers that meant we ended up with the great result that we did. But also, it could have been a very different race had Verstappen stayed in it.
True. And it's all, like, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But I guess one of the other issues, maybe slightly more tied to, say, a Kimi Räikkönen retirement, is safety. right? Yeah. So at the end of the day, this sport is highly dangerous. Even though, you know, we have seen some crashes in the past that look appalling and a driver walks out. That just goes to show how far the sport's come in terms of its safety. But obviously, when you have reliability issues, sometimes they can be, as I mean, the George Russell one might have been catastrophic for the team in terms of, like, they definitely couldn't have carried on, or the damage to that car was incredible. But, you know, we, like Kimi Räikkönen, this wasn't a reliability issue. I guess this was a team error. But the cross-threading of that wheel caused a wheel and tyre to go flying across a circuit. Yeah. If that had hit another car, if there had been fans there and that had flown over a fence and ended up like off track, like that could be really, really dangerous. And obviously there are kind of failures that are a bit more unsafe than others. So I guess is that another reason why we shouldn't be looking to reliability to be giving us good racing?
Yeah, definitely. I think safety is paramount. I think that is the most important thing in Formula One, really. And when we had the temporary ban on the engineers giving instructions to the drivers, the big argument against that was always safety. And I think there were loopholes saying that if it's a big safety issue and the car is about to fail, let them know, like, by all means tell them what's going on. And then obviously it becomes a very grey area that they couldn't police, so they just binned off that rule altogether. And I think that's really the fear here, that if a driver has an issue on a car and they are not told about it, for example, and but it's man and machine and you should be able to manage it, that could cause a lot of issues. And I think that's something that has to be considered, really, because the safety of the drivers and the fans and everyone involved, like, that is really paramount. So these cars, they are reliable. We want them to be able to go, obviously, as quickly as possible. We love the sort of seeing new track records and these breakneck race speeds. But it has to be safe, and it has to be that everyone can get home in one piece, hopefully. And because I think reliability is an important part of that. So as nice as the random failures could be in terms of spicing up the action, for the drivers and for the safety, it's not something we want to see on a regular basis.
Well, speaking of safety, we've got an argument saying that actually it's not the reliability that causes the action to get quite spicy. It's the safety car. So let's listen to Owen and what he thinks about what actually makes a good race.
Hi Jess, I don't believe it's necessarily the retirements that aid the kind of spectacle of F1, but it's the safety cars. Like, if that was 15 years ago, yesterday's race, some of those cars would have just been left at the side of the road and they wouldn't have been recovered and the race would have continued. Whereas now they throw out the safety car, bunches the field back up, leads to different strategies. Some drivers take a gamble on getting fresh tyres. It's the likes of that makes it's the unpredictability of that. So maybe it's that if a car does pull off, we do need to see, they're more obliged or more interested in putting out a safety car for the spectacle of the sport, as opposed to, so maybe the social distancing element of it will actually help the fans and the spectacle of F1 if they have to put out more safety cars.
So, I mean, that is an interesting point, and I'm sure Lewis Hamilton would absolutely hate the idea of having more safety cars put out, because he's not a fan of being behind one, is he? But it is true. Like, so in the case of the Austrian Grand Prix, those few safety cars that we saw did give us different plays. Like, it turned what would have been a one-stop race pretty straightforward. Start on the softs or the mediums and switch to the hard compounds, unless you're Sergio Perez and you're a mad thing and you go to the mediums, which I think maybe would have played out for him, but ended up not playing out for him. So
it was a risk, definitely.
But we love that. We love that about F1, don't we? We love it. We
Definitely.
love it when drivers take risks and kind of spice up the strategy. But that's what a safety car does, doesn't it? Because these guys, as we were saying, these teams simulate all the time what's going to happen, what's the prime strategy, and it essentially plays out. And then that gets a bit boring, because unless something happens in that pit stop that's human error, or unless a driver makes a mistake, it's so planned to perfection that we then don't get any mix-up, or we don't get, those one-stop races are really blooming boring half the time. So when we do get a safety car and it changes it all and everybody has to take different strategies, and we see, Red Bull's usually quite ballsy with their strategy, as we saw play out. I mean, it was kind of unfortunate that Albon got punted off the track, and then obviously had the failure at the end. But it meant that he was on. I think they were used softs, weren't they? They weren't fresh softs, but they were still. They still had more legs in them than the hards that the Mercedes was on, and he was taking it to him, which we would not have had the race just gone on as planned. So those safety cars really do change it up. And as we see in other motorsports, which you brought up before we came on to record, Luke, some sports actually force those scenarios, don't they? So you don't necessarily need to have had an incident. It's either that you have an incident, or there is a planned yellow flag scenario that bunches the pack back up, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we have competition cautions in NASCAR that is the whole point of them, that they do sort of bunch the field and make it more exciting. Because safety cars in F1, they do definitely have that effect. Like, they do make it really dramatic, as we saw play out wonderfully. And I think it would just be, I think, another level of being a bit too artificial if F1 were able to go down that route. I think you would see, obviously, the teams would then just factor in that, okay, well, on lap 20, we know we're definitely getting a safety car, and they would just factor that into all their data and telemetry and everything and their strategy, and it would just be like, well, okay, we'll just deal with that. So I think Owen's idea about maybe being a little bit more reactive to incidents on track, and maybe say a safety car when a yellow flag would do, for example, that would really, really spice things up. But you would end up with a lot of very angry drivers, such as Lewis Hamilton, because he'd be out in a 15-second lead, and then all of a sudden it just goes because someone lost a front wing end plate that's miles off the track. So there's kind of there's two sides to it, definitely. But I think those safety cars, it does have a really sort of exciting impact, and I think it is important that they sort of remain fairly random in terms of, like, it needs to be something warranted, because again, like, a safety car just for the sake of it, it'd be a bit dull and a bit boring, and we just really want it to be that it's exciting and that we don't know it's coming, basically. But I agree that the safety cars, that is the real exciting element of it. Perhaps less so than the actual cars failing themselves, because as you said about Albon, I think it would have been so cool to see him really take the fight to those two Mercedes. I think he would have done it as well. I think he would have won that Grand Prix, which would have been an amazing story. We want more of that, definitely.
But I think don't you think it also saved Bottas's arse a little bit?
Yes.
Because
completely. Yeah.
That first stint, he was running out of tyre life, and he was getting reeled in. Safety car. Yeah. In we go.
Yeah, exactly.
Double stack. See you later, Hamilton. I'm off again. Which I mean, that is racing, right? Because we can't. It would have been interesting to see what would have happened and whether he would have had such a dominant race had that not been the case. But it was the case, and he handled it brilliantly, and Mercedes handled it brilliantly, and he ended up winning the race. So I'm not trying to take it away from him. All right, he definitely did. He did a good job. It's okay. It's okay for me to admit that. I can do that. But safety cars can, I guess, in both scenarios, they can either add to the racing or actually take away from the racing as well. So I think basically safe to say there's no real conclusion to this, I guess. I think it would be great to see less reliance on data and less reliance on kind of building these perfect machines, but also this is a marketing exercise for these manufacturers. They want to be shown that they are super reliable and the best of the best, and that they build things that fly at incredible speeds and set records and win races. So again, it's kind of like against the nature of Formula One in that sense from a team's perspective. But I guess it all comes down to, if the wheel-to-wheel racing was better, then we wouldn't need to manufacture these scenarios, would we?
Yeah, precisely. Like, if we had 20 cars that were all fairly evenly matched, then it wouldn't matter that, the Mercedes, they only got overtaken by the Red Bulls because they had a reliability issue, or someone else had an issue and the safety car came out and that bunched the field or whatever. It would be really cool that all the cars sort of like within firing range of each other, basically, so that it wouldn't matter. No, that it would be that you're going to see an exciting fight at the front. And you mentioned the 2012 season earlier. That's a perfect example of it, that you had that run of 7 weekends where each weekend a different team was the front runner and the fastest, or teams took advantage of opportunities such as Checo Perez and Sauber in the rain in Malaysia to finish second. It's things like that. I think that's really what we want to see. And I think in F1, like nowadays, we've still got, it was the big three, it's now temporarily the big two at the front. And you've got that really tight midfield that is really well bunched. And that was really exciting in Austria. Like even without the safety cars, like it would have been an easy win and an easy 1-2 for Mercedes. Yes, Red Bull with Albon probably comfortably third. But then behind that, like you had a really good fight, I think, brewing between Racing Point, McLaren, Ferrari, Renault. And ultimately, if that was at the front, then we'd be laughing. Like, it'd be absolutely great. And we wouldn't need to worry about, are the cars too reliable or anything? Because then you would kind of be saying, well, if they're not reliable enough, then that takes away from that fight. That takes away from that really, really close battle. So, yeah, I think it's something that there's a bigger issue that F1 needs to resolve, and that is ultimately the raceability and the closeness of these cars. But we know that 2021 they're working towards that. So hopefully it'll be that in the future we're not so worried about the reliability, and we don't talk about the good old days of the 90s, because we will be in the good old days and we'll have, 5 teams going to race going. We could probably win this one without any reliability issues.
I mean, I think Ferrari are actually a bit quaking in their boots at the fact that they've got to basically keep this car for next year until the new regulations come in 2022.
Yeah.
But
and even the engines, like Binotto said after the race, he was like, we're losing 0.7 seconds a lap on the engine alone, which is a huge amount. And that's frozen for the year, so that's not going to change all year. So Monza is going to be an absolute nightmare.
Oh, God. Well, there you
Sorry,
go.
Ferrari fans.
That's racing. Anyway, maybe that says that why F1 should be a spec series, just saying. But maybe that's another unpopular opinion that we'll dive into another day. But I guess, so looking ahead to this weekend, because obviously we are blessed in the fact that we've got another race.
It's race week again.
Did I hear something? Did you say something? I don't think you... No? Okay, that's what I thought. But... is it likely, Luke? You've set me off now. I'm
sorry.
mad. I'm mad. Do you know what? Hardly anybody sent me any race week memes this week, and I thought that I'd gotten away with it. Yeah, because guess what?
I was up really late
after a while.
I was up really late on a Sunday night, and it got to 2 minutes past midnight. I was like, I could text Jess and just be like, it's race week, but then I thought she'd probably never talk to me again.
I would cancel this podcast. I'd find somebody else. I'd replace you if you did that to me. But oh god, what, I can't remember where I was going with this now, because you
were looking ahead to this weekend's race because it's race week.
Stop it. Right. What are the chances that we're going to get the same reliability issues as we saw last weekend?
Very good question. Mercedes have already said they're pretty hopeful of getting some fixes in, but the issue is that it's such a tight turnaround between the 2 weekends that it's that's a really big ask to get anything on the car and resolved and ready. I think Mercedes, they're going to obviously probably be a bit more mindful. We might hear the message saying stay off the curbs from very, very early on, because I think they're quite confident about the pace they've got in the car that they'd have had the measure of Red Bull regardless. So I think that's something they're going to basically go into very aware of. And I think all of the other teams as well, I think they're just going to be very they're just going to try and do their processes better. Alpha will look into why was Kimi's wheel nut cross threaded to prevent that happening again. Racing Point, they'll look at the issue on Stroll's engine that I understand was more their end than Mercedes' end. Williams, I think that's going to be probably a whole new power unit on Russell's car. So it's things like that, and they'll just look at all the processes and see what they can do. There will be things that they can't control because of the tight turnaround, but I think it's going to be fascinating to see. You give everyone a do-over, basically, because normally they'll come out of a race weekend and go, okay, I wish I'd done X, Y, and Z differently. Now, you've got the chance to do all of that. You've got another go, another shot. So that's going to be really fascinating, and I think that it's going to be really interesting to see on the strategy front, if everyone plays out a similar picture. Will Red Bull try and go their own way again? Will Horner be in full Karen mode and try and protest every single thing he can with Mercedes? I don't know. But it's going to be...
He's such a Karen, isn't he?
Last weekend was just ridiculous, but... All fair, it was all fair, but it was just when we got the one on Sunday, an hour before the race, saying, we're protesting again. It's come on.
I saw a lot of comments on Twitter saying that was the double DNF was karma for Horner throwing all of his toys out the pram. I think that's a bit harsh, but
little bit maybe, yeah. But it is going to be fascinating.
There was a little bit of me that was well,
a little bit true. Yeah, but it is going to be fascinating to see what teams can do to actually fix the issues that blighted them in Austria this weekend. last weekend even. And I just think it's going to be. But if the race is anything like last weekend's was, I can't wait. I'm so excited. Yeah. So excited.
I hope it's not an anticlimax, but it's so hard. It is so hard to follow a race that was that good. Like, I'm not expecting it to be that good, but if it could even be like half as good, I think I'd still be happy.
Definitely.
So, well, we've got all that to look forward to this week. End, not week end. So we'll just have to see, and maybe our theory will be proved, and maybe it'll be disproved, because we were given an absolute treat last weekend. So let's hope for more of the same. Thank you to everybody for listening, for tuning in on YouTube. If you are tuning in on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Oh, actually, it's over there, isn't it? Down here. Hit the subscribe button, because we'll be bringing you so much content across this season, as well as if you're listening on podcast platforms, make sure you are subscribed to this, because this will be coming to you every week without fail, hopefully, fingers crossed. And we'll make sure that you are getting involved, sending in your audio notes as much as possible. We'll be briefing you on what each subject will be every week over on the Autosport Twitter page, so make sure you're following over on Twitter. I guess let's see what this weekend brings, because it's another back-to-back, which is brill. But it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me, and next week I'm getting a haircut, so I'm very excited for that, and that's what I want to end on.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. See you later.